The first police officer ever killed in the line of duty in Regina, Canada. Get your giggles out. Well, it's still to this day an unsolved mystery. Hello, true crimerers. This is another Coldest Cases by Canadian Province, and today we're going to Saskatchewan. And this is the case of Constable George Anthony Leonard. Viewer discretion is advised. So today we're going to Regina, which is in Saskatchewan. I know some of you are going to giggle, but stop it, grow up, all right? We're here to tell a story. This is a very old one. This is from August 6th, 1933. George Anthony Leonard had just celebrated his 28th birthday. He was a constable in the Regina police force. Well, on the evening of August 6, 1933, he was doing his rounds, and this was in, I guess, like a warehouse district, where it was just warehouses and, like, fields, and there wasn't much else out there. The area was so large that he had to basically cover that area while riding a bicycle. There is, I guess, a set of tracks, train tracks, that runs next to this building that was called the Canadian Liquid Air Plant. George was on his bike going past the building, and near the tracks behind the building, he saw three men, and they appeared to be kind of like out of sorts. Like it didn't look like they belonged there, that they were doing something not right. So he would take his bike and go right up to them. Basically what happens next is from the account of an eyewitness. Two eyewitnesses, actually. Teenagers Donald Campbell and Artis Aney, I guess, was his girlfriend or a female friend of his. The two of them weren't like up and close to the situation, they were pretty far away, but they could see enough. As Constable Leonard approached the men, the witnesses said they heard George say, stop to the three men. The witnesses then said they heard one of the men say something along the lines of no, or something just like a single word, like in refute of what the constable was asking them to do. And then one of the men lifted a gun. This man yelled very loudly, and the teenagers heard this very clearly. They said the phrase, "Stick 'em up." George was, at this point, off of his bike, but his hands were still holding on to the handlebars so the bike wouldn't fall over. The teenagers said they heard George say, "What?" to the man who lifted the gun, and then a gunshot rang out. And it's believed this was a revolver. They're not 100% positive, but that's the weapon they think was being used. And then George kind of reacts, and he begins to back up towards the building. The witnesses said they saw the guy with the gun still kind of following him, and then they saw George trying to reach something under his police officer, his tunic, likely his gun, but he didn't get it in time. He didn't even get it at all, because they would find out later he never even fired a shot. Then two more shots rang out. The witnesses then said they saw the three men run away in a hurry, and the teenager Donald, he ran towards, I guess, Winnipeg Street, where he knew for a fact another officer was. So he bolted there to get the attention of this officer, while apparently George Leonard is still alive, and he is dragging himself and crawling, I guess, towards the building, and there's the big roll-up door, I guess, is kind of partially open, and so he manages to roll underneath it, where one of the workers kind of sees him and says, "Oh my God," and the worker goes towards him, and no, I don't know why the teenagers didn't go run to him first, I'm not sure, but the worker says that Constable George Leonard said two words, but he didn't know what those words were because they were so, just garbled. They were just very muffled, and unfortunately, George Leonard he died. This all happened just shortly before 10 p.m. that evening. The coroner confirmed that he did, in fact, have 3 gunshot wounds. The funeral for Constable Leonard was held on August 9th, 1933, and, a lot of people showed up to pay their respects. Regina police, they wanted to know who the hell did this. One of their own was gunned down, and the two teenagers gave the absolute best descriptions they could possibly give, but they were still pretty far back. The guy that actually shot George, they said was tall, like pretty tall, but also super heavy set. There was times where like they thought that this may have been the work of some local gangs, and actually there was like, I guess, a gang from the United States that had actually originated in Saskatchewan, but then did all of their crimes in the United States, and it's believed they may have fled back up to Saskatchewan around this time, and they thought, well, maybe it was them. But then the descriptions the two teenagers gave didn't match any of the known affiliates of this gang. Police did get a couple of tips. One resident said that around 8:40 p.m. on August 6th, they think they bumped into a man who looked just like the description the witnesses gave that eventually shot George Leonard, but nothing ever came from that. And then this was a popular time for transients in the area, like a lot of them. So they thought, oh, this could have been a transient, and now that these people are probably long gone. But they couldn't determine that. Were they train hoppers? Don't know. It sounded almost like they were caught in the act of robbing something, but when they, that area, they're like, well, what exactly were they even trying to steal from here? And they really couldn't determine that either. So it's so very, very unclear what those three men were even doing in that spot, and then what led to them shooting a cop. Did George Leonard see something truly bad or at least illegal, and that's why the men reacted and shot him? They have really no legitimate kind of theory here. A year or so after the murder in April of 1934, they did bring a suspect in, a man named Matt Kowalchuk, who I guess was a prominent train robber. I forgot, this is like during the time where like train robbers were like an actual thing. And they actually were searching for him for a while because they thought that this guy, because they knew about him, may have been responsible. But eventually they're just like, there was nothing they could link him to the murders. They did not charge him with anything to do with this murder. They dedicated, a memorial to Constable George Leonard. The one thing they haven't been able to do is solve his murder. And it is 2023 now. We're talking, this is almost 90 years ago. The people who did this are definitely dead. There's just, unless it was a 2-year-old and they're like 92 now, but the killers are gone. They're gone forever, and they were never caught. It doesn't mean that they necessarily can't solve this, but, also in 1933, collecting DNA evidence wasn't even remotely close to a thing they even knew about. Collecting anything physical like that, the best they could do is like fingerprints, but there wasn't any of those. There really wasn't anything. They really had to rely on eyewitness testimony. They had it just didn't produce a suspect. I guess in 2005, Saskatchewan police were like, let's just try, right? And so I guess they found a photo of these three men from that time era, and I guess one of them was holding a revolver or some kind of gun. It appeared they were almost like joking and doing like a mocking type robbery scenario. And I guess there was a note with this photo that implied that it was rumored that one of these men had talked about having committed the murder of George Leonard, but it's kind of unclear as to where that information came from and really where the photo came from. I'm showing you the photo, but it's, I don't know if they identified these men or not, but like I said, if it was those three men, they are definitely dead. They won't ever face justice for this, and no one will. And honestly, most of his, the family he had at that time, they're probably gone too, unfortunately. And so this is just one of those cases where there's not going to be an answer. There's not going to be closure. It's not going to be justice. There's not going to be anything. They got away with cold-blooded murder. But you never know. They could always find something to just say we know who did it. But that's the best they will ever be able to do, is just say we think we may know who did this, but they'll never be able to even confirm it. And it's cases like that. It's really sad. And there are so many of them out there throughout the entire world where people just blatantly got away with it and got to live their lives. Hopefully their lives were living hell. one could hope. That's actually it for this case, True Crime Maroonies. I hope you found it interesting. A 3-year-old girl was kidnapped just 15 feet from her backyard. And 40 years later, her family and police are still looking for her killer. Hello, True Crimerers. This is the case of Rachael Runyan. Viewer discretion is advised. Rachael Marie Runyan was born on June 23rd, 1979, and she was born in Ogden, Utah. Rachael was the middle child of 3. She had an older brother named Justin, and then a younger brother named Nathan. The 3 of them were just separated by 4 or 5 years or so. So they were very close, they grew up together, and they absolutely loved playing together. Her parents, Jeff and Elaine Runyan, they had actually lived in Tennessee prior to Rachael being born. Roughly a year or so before Rachael was born, they moved from Tennessee to, the little town of Sunset, Utah. The Runyans wanted to continue growing their family, because at that point, before they moved, they had the one son, but they wanted more, and they wanted to make sure they were living in a community that they felt was safe. So they did their research, and they kind of found this little town with about 6,000 people, Sunset, and they heard so many great things about it. It was such a safe community, great for kids, great for families, and so they ended up moving there. And then a year later, Rachael was born. By the time Rachael was about 3 years old, she was a child beauty pageant queen. She was actually named Little Miss Sunset about 6 months or so before this story takes place. Rachael didn't have much time to live, so there really isn't much known about her because she barely got to experience life. The little time that she was on this earth, Rachael was described as a very sweet, very loving girl who seemed to always have a smile on her face, and she loved to laugh. Her parents and grandparents would say that Rachael was just a super well-behaved kid. She got along with everyone, and just everyone adored her. And she, for a child, was very, very trusting. It was August 26th, 1982. It was a sunny, peaceful Thursday afternoon in the middle of the summer. Elaine was home with the 3 kids. Her husband was at work. 5-year-old Justin and 3-year-old Rachael, they had been begging their mom if they could take Nathan to the playground and play. Now, pretty much all of the time, every single time, Elaine was someone who never let her children go to the playground unsupervised without an adult. Now, something to be said here is that the playground we're talking about is literally 15 feet behind their backyard. I'm going to show a photo of the house and the playground as it is today. It looked different back then, which you'll see another photo of that later. But you can see how close we're talking here. The backyard gate back then had a swing open gate, so that would be super easy for the family to just kind of go out the backyard gate straight to the playground so the kids can play. The way it's also laid out is that from their kitchen window you can see a good portion of the playground as it was back then. You cannot see all of it, but you could see enough of it, and if someone needed to shout hey kids, what are you doing, the mom or the dad, it's literally so close you could have a loud conversation, so to speak, to make sure they're doing okay, and you can hear them playing. So this one particular time, Elaine said, because they were begging, they were really, really kind of begging her, please, 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 can we take our brother? He was 1 year old. Can we please take him to the playground and play with him? And so Elaine caved in and said yes. So for her, she was going to be doing some cleaning in the kitchen that afternoon, and she was also making lunch for all of them. So she'd be in the kitchen with the window and be able to see them in the playground. I mean, if you add the length of the backyard, we're talking what? 30-ish feet, maybe 30, 35 feet from her window to the playground. I know a lot of people nowadays, when I make videos with similar stories, they want to sit here and say, well, why'd the parent do this and why'd the parent do that? This is 1982 when this story takes place. All right, 1982, times were, and I say this all the time, times were significantly different. Back then, people were way more trusting of their neighbors, of their community. It just was the time. You know, you couldn't relay a piece of information to the entire world in a second by tweeting something. So the stories of kids who go missing nowadays, it's different than it was back then. That's just what I'm going to say. So Elaine said yes. And the playground was also a part of like this elementary school that was also like right next to their house, obviously. And there were what appeared to be other, younger kids playing there at the time. The kids basically left the house sometime around like 12:30 in the afternoon. And over the next, 15 minutes or so, Elaine is, she can see them. She doesn't have her eyes on them the entire time because she's doing other things, but she constantly is looking up. She's kind of shouting to them, hey, are you guys doing okay? They're responding, everything's fine. So, everything is going fine. But then at about 12:55 p.m., she looks out the window and she notices that she can't see any of her kids. So she immediately calls out for them, hey, what's going on? You guys need to come home right now. And so within like a minute, Justin, the oldest brother, who's 5, he comes home holding the 1-year-old brother, Nathan. But Rachael isn't with him. And the mom says, where's Rachael? And so he tells her what had just happened. He came back super upset. At some point, when the kids were playing on the playground, an unknown man parked his car near the playground, got out of his car, and walked towards the playground. The kids did not know who this man was. And at the same time, by the way, there is a 10-year-old boy who I guess the kids kind of knew, who was also playing there. The man approaches the 10-year-old boy first. Apparently nothing happens from that. The man then goes to the sandbox where Rachael is playing with her 2 brothers. The man sits down and starts to have like the super quiet but friendly conversation with them. He asks them, what's your favorite ice cream? Do you guys like candy? And so they're kids, 5 years old, 3 years old, and then, they have a 1-year-old. They're like, yeah, we like, this kind of ice cream and blah, blah, blah. And then the guy gets up and says, well, hey, let me take you to the supermarket just down the road because they serve ice cream there, like, scooped ice cream and candy. And I'll buy you guys some if you guys want to come with me. And he looked at Rachael and said, do you like bubble gum? And she said, yes. And, he goes, oh, I have bubble gum in the car. Let's go get some. And so Rachael, being a 3-year-old child, she doesn't know any better. She's trusting. She starts to walk with this guy. And then her older brother Justin's like, Rachael, what are you doing? This is a stranger. We're not supposed to go with strangers. And so Rachael kind of stops and she kind of goes, oh yeah. And then she turns around and starts to walk back towards her brother. And then this man literally just runs up to Rachael, takes her, throws her over his shoulder, and runs away. Rachael starts screaming, and then he just sort of forces her into his car, and he gets in and he speeds off. And then literally like a moment later is when the mom says, where are you guys? So now Elaine's like, oh my God, like she's freaking out. And her first thought is she loads all the kids into the car and she drives to the supermarket, just thinking, okay, maybe he took her there. Maybe he did. And so she looks around the entire place, can't find her. She's asking everyone, have you seen Rachael? No one's seen her. She never came in. Holy shit, Rachael is missing. She immediately calls police, reports her missing. Within an hour of the moment Rachael disappeared, police have roadblocks literally all over town, just in case this guy hasn't gotten very far. Unfortunately, the roadblocks don't do anything because through this method, they'd never find her. They never find the man. They never find the vehicle. They do put a bolo out for this man and for his car. That day, there were no adults at the playground, so police had to rely solely on the eyewitness account of children, of a 5-year-old boy, a 1-year-old who can't say anything about this, and then the 10-year-old boy who was also there. But through them, they're able to get a description of the man, pretty detailed description, and a pretty detailed description of his car. The 10-year-old boy said that the man was a black male who was maybe in his 20s, possibly 30s. He said he was maybe like 5'8", 6 foot tall, possibly. He had like a medium build. He had like this short, kind of like afro-style hair, is how he described it. At first, he described his mustache as like a handlebar mustache, and then later it was sort of kind of determined to be this mustache that had like a split down the middle, so that aspect changed. The man wore blue jeans. He also had a blue pullover shirt, and there was this like kind of thick red stripe that went across the chest of the shirt and then the sleeves. I'm showing a picture. This is an image of a very similar shirt, if not the exact type of shirt. He also had on blue sneakers with white stripes on them. The car was described as looking kind of older, maybe a station wagon sort of car. Again, keep in mind this is a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old describing it. They said the car was like a dark blue color. It had the wood trim around the side of the car. And I'm showing images of a very similar vehicle. It's obviously not the exact one, but this is the car that police believe it likely was. Police said it sounded very similar to a Ford Pinto Squire, which was a station wagon. When the story broke about Rachael's kidnapping, police were told that on the same exact day, at another park before Rachael was taken, multiple witnesses said they saw a man who looked very similar to the description the boys gave about who took Rachael. They saw this man at a park talking to some very, very young boys, children, at this park. Now, this man didn't actually do anything in terms of obviously taking anyone. The witnesses here described the man as being very similar to what the boys described, but with one major difference, that it wasn't a black male, it was a Hispanic male. Now, the interesting thing about that is the 5-year-old, Justin, Rachael's older brother, he said, as best as he could, as a 5-year-old, that he didn't think the man was a black man. He said he looked more like a Hispanic man. The eyewitness of this 10-year-old boy who saw the actual kidnapping along with Justin. But police looked at the 10-year-old boy and said, well, he's 10, he's older, so his story is likely more believable. We have to run with what he is saying. And he is saying that it was a black male. So police were really operating under this notion that it could have only been a black person who did this, not a Hispanic man, who was seen at the other park mingling with children. Also in a very similar car, if not the same car. This kind of thing can be detrimental in terms of finding this person. But they were running with this description of it being a black man, and that's what they were putting in the news and the newspapers and all that. Police also believed that this man was a local person who lived in Sunset, because the grocery store that sold, the scooped out ice cream cones and all that wasn't really known to anyone other than people who lived in this small town. And he was very specific, this man, when talking to the kids at the park about it. So they believed it was someone who lived there. Rachael's parents kind of went with the idea of, we think Rachael was kidnapped and put into some kind of illegal adoption ring, or possibly a child sex trafficking ring. Police would investigate this. They would look heavily into all of that in terms of possible motives and looking into, known criminals who may have been involved in similar things, but they couldn't find any evidence, any physical proof, any circumstantial evidence, any witnesses to state anything along the lines of that she was put into some kind of abduction ring. The family, the entire community, the police, they all went full force into searching for little Rachael. They looked everywhere, high and low, all over the town, all of the surrounding areas. the wooded areas, anywhere that possibly a person might dispose of a body. But despite all of the searching, the community just could not find her. There was never any ransom calls that were made, and there was just no trace of her. And then, on September 19th, 1982, 24 days after 3-year-old Rachael Runyan was kidnapped off the playground, the search would end. In Mountain Green, Utah, which was about 20 miles away from the Runyan home, in a very desolate, wooded area and in a little creek, 2 locals had just been in the area and they found the body of a very, very young girl halfway submerged in the creek. And this was off of Trappers Loop Road. The body, not only was it submerged in halfway in water, but it also had like leaves and a log put on top as to, almost to hide them. The young girl was partially nude. She had her hands and her feet tied behind her back, and she was very badly decomposed. She was so badly decomposed that it was impossible to state what her cause of death was. They have never been able to determine how she died. Rachael was also only 3 years old, like I've said. She didn't have dental records yet. You know, there wasn't much that they could look at from a scientific standpoint and identify her. So, unfortunately, her parents had to identify their daughter through the underwear that she was wearing, and through the piercings in her ears, and through a chip in her tooth. And that's how they were able to confirm that the body was, in fact, 3-year-old Rachael Runyan. A couple 100 feet away from where the body was found, they would then find a pile of partially burnt clothing, and it was a dress that is the dress that the parents confirmed is that what Rachael was wearing the day she was taken. Sadly, there really wasn't any significant evidence left behind on her body or on the clothing, at least back in 1982, that they were able, to take or collect. There was just nothing, and so nothing that they could link to a suspect. The family had no enemies. There was no people that, the mom or dad had been fighting with. There was nothing. There were thoughts that, she was a beauty pageant, a child beauty pageant queen. And maybe someone saw Rachael during all of this and decided to do something to her. Maybe this guy somehow found out where she lived by some chance. But what kind of takes away from that potential lead is that, like I said earlier, this man did not approach Rachael at the park first. He actually approached the 10-year-old boy first. What he said to the 10-year-old boy, by the way, I'm not sure. But clearly, the guy didn't get what he wanted out of that conversation. And what also the witnesses who saw the similar man at another park earlier that day said that he specifically approached little boys at the park. So what they think is that this man was really targeting, boys, but he had to react in a hurry because, the situation. And so he just took Rachael, and that's who he got. And then he, ran off with her. And then the case just goes cold. I mean, they have nothing. There's like no tips or leads that come in. It just immediately goes cold. And it stays cold for about 2.5 years before police are given a new piece of potential evidence. A security guard at a laundromat there in Sunset, Utah, would go to police because in the bathroom of the laundromat, the security guard went in and saw a very disturbing and crude message sort of written on the wall. The message said, "Beware, I'm still at large. I killed the little Runyan girl. Remember, beware." And then there was a drawing of an upside down cross with 666 written around the cross. So now they think, well, maybe this is like a satanic cult who abducted her and needed her for some sick, twisted ritual. The 80s and the 90s were big into the satanic panic culture. It was a big deal then, and it was thought to be the motive of a lot of murders then. Investigators would kind of back up this theory of possible satanic cult, involvement, because on 2 separate occasions, someone, and they have no idea who, left a bouquet of dead black roses on Rachel's grave. So they're like, this is all kind of lining up with this satanic thing, but they also had no evidence. They had no proof. This message written on the wall could have been just a sick person playing a really stupid joke. This message could have been written by a totally random person who had no involvement, or it could have been written by the killer. The issue is no one knows. Maybe the killer did write it, but did the whole satanic thing as a way to throw police off. To this day, it's not known. The case became more disturbing when police in 1989 got, I guess, some information from an anonymous informant or something along those lines, where this person came forward to say that they know that Rachael Runyan was kidnapped for the purpose of making a movie. A movie where the 3-year-old girl on camera was tortured, sexually assaulted, and then brutally murdered. And then this recording, this tape, they made copies of it, and they sold it to people. This is known as a snuff film. Sick, demented people who get off on this kind of thing. Police kind of, they had a gut feeling that this was a valid tip, that it had some kind of validity to it. They put out information to, the media, like, listen, if anyone has seen this tape, if anyone has any evidence that this tape exists, if you've seen it and don't have the tape, anything, please come to us. They even said, if you've seen it or you have a copy of the tape, you can make a copy of the copy to give to us. Anything. We will keep your anonymity. You'll be anonymous this entire time. I mean, you're sick, but if you're not the one to have killed her, we won't put your name out there. We just need to know if this is the right path. But nothing ever came from it. No one ever called them. No one ever sent a copy of the tape. No one knows if the tape even exists, or even if this was the actual crime that took place. And so after like a year or two of kind of investigating this path, it went cold again. Ice cold. In 2007, the case was reopened by a cold case team, and they had evidence still, of course, that was saved, including the clothing that was found near her and the underwear she was wearing, plus, the ropes that were used to tie her up. They swabbed all of it, tested all of it for any traces of DNA that wasn't hers. And this was in 2007, and to this day, this case is still unsolved. So it doesn't sound like anything ever came from it. If they found DNA profiles, it didn't match anyone, because no one's been arrested for this. In 2012, police announced that they did have a person of interest, that this man that they have in mind, they confirmed lived in Sunset, Utah, that time frame, and was there in Sunset the day this happened. And now this person is a inmate in a Pennsylvania prison. However, they have not really disclosed, first of all, who it is. They haven't disclosed what led them to this man, but they've never pressed charges against him either. And this was about 10 years ago at the time of this video-ish. So maybe this guy, whoever he was, wasn't the guy. Around that same time, they said, well, we now have another suspect that we also confirmed was living in Sunset at that time. They said that this person now lives in New Mexico. This time, they haven't said his name. They've never released his name. But this time they said they do have evidence that would support this man's guilt. But it is not sufficient enough evidence to be able to get an arrest warrant issued. So it's not great evidence, basically. What that evidence is, I don't know. If they have physical evidence to show, a male profile, for example, it's not known. A lot of times they keep that private, of course, for obvious reasons. But even still, with this person, they said they have evidence to link him, whoever this guy is. No arrests have been made. The guy's never been charged. So, is it him? Could be. They have said that they believe that this person has people in their life who know that this man killed Rachael, but that the friends or the people who know are too afraid to come forward because possibly this guy has threatened to harm them or kill them if they do come forward. Just speculation on their behalf, but that's what they think. And then, as recently as 2022, a woman has come forward to state that she believes that her uncle is the person to have killed Rachael. This woman, who wants to be kept anonymous for obvious reasons, said that she and her family lived in Sunset. As a matter of fact, her and her brother were in the same class as Justin, way back when they were all kids together, and that her uncle, who, by the way, I don't think Justin had ever actually seen the uncle, so he wouldn't be able to say, oh yeah, you're my friend's uncle. But she said that she has solid reasons to believe that her uncle is the one to do this. The interesting thing here is that this is a Hispanic man. The other two men, by the way, that police say they believe could be a suspect, I don't know what their race is. But why it's interesting about this woman saying it was her uncle and him being Hispanic is that Justin, the 5-year-old boy, would describe the man who took his sister as being Hispanic and not black. And then the witnesses from the other park who said that this man was Hispanic and not black. But they only relied on the witness statement of the 10-year-old boy to say who it was. So this guy, being Hispanic, would line up with the whole situation. If you're only looking for just black men during that time, you cost the entire investigation, because now this guy has been able to just run free because you're looking for the wrong person. Have police looked into this woman's uncle? I don't know 100%. I do know that they are aware of it. This was relatively recently still, so they may be investigating it as we speak. And who knows, there could be a breakthrough any day now, but I don't know for sure. All I know is, as of right now, as of me filming this video on April 9th, 2023, no one has ever been arrested and no one has ever been charged with the murder of Rachael Runyan. But someone kidnapped that young girl off of a playground in front of her brothers and murdered her, and then left her in a creek. There are eyewitnesses who saw this man as close as you and I on this camera right now. There are eyewitnesses who saw this man's car. Someone out there has to know who this man is and has to recognize that car. It has been 40 years. Rachael would be about 43 years old today. But her life was permanently halted at 3 years old. She trusted a stranger because she was 3 years old. An innocent, happy-go-lucky 3-year-old child who just wanted ice cream and bubble gum. And a man took advantage of that 3-year-old girl's innocence and ripped a massive and forever whole in the hearts of this family and of that community. We will never get to know what Rachael would have contributed to our society. We will only ever get to know the could have beens. We can only guess, because one man decided to murder a 3-year-old child for his own sick, demented reasons. He stole so much from the world. So much potential, so much life, so much joy, so many smiles. He took that. There is nothing more valuable and precious than that of the life of an innocent child. And because of one monster, 3-year-old Rachael Runyan never got to live. Ever since this happened, Elaine Runyan has been a huge champion and advocate for spreading awareness about missing and exploited children, not just in Utah, but all over the country, for helping further child safety. She actually helped start the Rachael Alert in Utah, which would later be adapted to become the Amber Alert for the entire country. In 2016, the very park that Rachael was kidnapped from, which had since gotten a huge facelift and all new equipment, of course, well, it was named the Rachael Runyan Memorial Park. They put this really big, beautiful stone with her story and her picture on it, and her name, of course, and have dedicated all of it to her. In 2017, the Rachael Runyan Missing and Exploited Children's Day passed through Utah's legislation. And that's basically for the purpose of creating a day to spread awareness about missing and exploited children. Someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth about what happened to Rachael Runyan and who did this to her and her family. And perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information about the murder of Rachael Runyan, you can report your information to the local authorities there in Sunset, Utah. You can always report the information anonymously, and even the smallest, tiniest bit of information can help. You never know. So please contact them if you have any information, and try to help get this family the answers they deserve. There is a house in New York City they call the House of Death, and it's been... I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, hello, true spookers, scarers, whatever it is. Today's video is the story of the House of Death. Viewer discretion is advised. So this is part ghost story and part true crime story. This is a combo. The House of Death was actually constructed way back in 1856. Back when I was in my 3rd year of kindergarten. Again, not a very smart person I was. It was a Greek brownstone building that resides in Greenwich Village in New York, New York. And it's located on West 10th Street. Many people have lived in this building. It started off as being just kind of like a normal home, and then eventually it was turned into an apartment building. It one time housed the founder of the Metropolitan Underground Railroad, and also the founder of the Broadway Underground Railroad. His name was James Borman Johnson. After his death, his wife and children would remain in the house, which was around the 1880s or so. Apparently, the house is also known for just bad luck. In 1897, bicycle person, famous bicycle person, Fred Andrew, was riding his bike right in front of his house when he struck a young boy, ran him over with his bike. The boy ended up getting a broken leg, but he survived, and I think the guy was arrested. But he actually lived in that house as well. The most famous resident of the House of Death is actually a man named Samuel Clemens, but you probably know him as Mark Twain. He is a legend of the American literature. Mark Twain only lived in the house for sometime like around a year-ish. At this point, he is kind of towards the tail end of his career, and he is kind of depressed and living kind of a sad life. But he also had heard about how the history of this house, how there was reported ghosts being seen in this home. So over the course of time, apparently roughly 22 people died in this building. And dating back to the late 1800s or so, there had been numerous reported sightings of ghosts in this building. There have been the sounds of footsteps, the horrible odors coming from the house. There has been phantom animals being seen in there, the laughter of children and people crying. But Mark Twain didn't believe any of that, because Mark Twain was a very staunch skeptic. He did not believe in this stuff whatsoever. However, he would end up writing a book, I guess, based on his time there in the house. And it was like it was a ghost story. On one particular evening, this is directly a recollection from Mark Twain himself, he saw a piece of firewood in the home essentially levitate and begin floating near the fireplace. There was no one else there, no one was holding it, it was just floating. And he took out a gun, a pistol he had, and he shot the piece of wood, and then it fell to the ground. He even stated that when he looked at the piece of wood after he shot at it, there were a few drops of blood on that piece of wood and on the ground. Even though Mark Twain himself says that he did not see anybody or anything, he didn't see a rat, he didn't see anything, he still claimed it was a rat he must have shot, and that a rat was responsible for lifting this piece of wood off the ground, even though there was no rat carcass. Now, obviously, New York is known for rats, but this particular home had never really had a history of rats. And so, but him being this big skeptic was like, nope, I'm not believing it. I don't care what I saw, not believing it. Here's an explanation for it. Science. But many people do believe that, I mean, this is a story that directly came from him, and based on how he described it, many people believe that that was truly a ghost that did that. Where the blood came from, though, I don't know. He moved out of the house by 1901, and on April 21st, 1910, he died of a heart attack. People who were then living in the House of Death, which is what it became nicknamed, people who lived there over the course of time said they started to see the ghost of a mustachioed man kind of roaming around the house. Mark Twain was very notably had a very prominent mustache. In the 20s through the 30s, there would be a ton of sightings of this mustachioed man kind of just sort of walking around the house or the building aimlessly. A woman and her daughter were living in the home at one point, and they say that one night they saw a mustachioed man sitting on by a window. He was inside their home, and it was very clear to them that this was a person. And they kind of approached him by saying, "How did you get in here? Who are you?" And this person, this entity, this whatever, responded to them. And it said, quote, "My name is Clemens, and I has a problem here I gotta settle," end quote. And then within a few seconds, he vanishes right before their eyes. Mark Twain, at the time he lived in the house, he had been going through bankruptcy, and he was having some financial issues. He was having a problem with money. And so that's what some people have attributed to the "I have a problem here, I gotta settle" part of that quote. Some people think that. But then also at the same time, Mark Twain didn't die in the house. He died elsewhere. But it has been known before, again, if you believe in this sort of thing, which I do, sometimes a ghost will haunt a place it's been in the past but didn't die in. Perhaps his ghost haunts that building because he was such a skeptic, and now he's like, oh, never mind, I guess people can see me. By the late 50s, an author by the name of Jan Bryant Bartell, she moved into the building. her and her daughter had moved into an apartment because at that point the building had been turned into apartments. The apartment they lived in had once been the house where servants stayed back when it was just one house. Within a day or so of her moving into this apartment, she began to see what she quoted as saying is a monstrous shadow, and it would move, back and forth. That on a couple of occasions, this humongous shadow person was literally following her around the house. Another occasion, she said she just flat out saw a full body apparition of a man just standing in her hallway staring back at her. No thanks, I don't need to see that. But when she saw this man, she actually reaches out to touch him to see what I guess he feels like, I don't know. When she touched it, she said it felt like a substance without substance. She said it was the most bizarre thing she ever felt. It was chilly and damp, but then her hand wasn't damp afterwards. It was dry. She said it almost appeared as like a mist or a haze in the person's form. And then it just vanished. The Bartell family also said they smelled some really foul odors. They've seen the ghost of a cat roaming around. And there was a reported story about, so I guess she called in some kind of paranormal investigator or a psychic to look into this building. And the psychic said that they felt or they know that buried in the house is the body of a dead cat, a baby, and at least one other person who died in the home that was just buried somewhere in the house. Have those bodies ever been dug up or found? No. But the numerous tenants over the years who had like small animals like cats or small dogs, I guess their animals would become really agitated by something that the animals saw. And this may have likely been this ghostly cat that was like causing havoc. But many residents would smell really horrific smells, but also sometimes like cigar smells and sweet perfume type odors just kind of coming out of nowhere. When Miss Bartell had the psychic come there and, she said, the body's buried somewhere in this house, they also said that there are at least 22 spirits living in this house. And I can't find like a record of the people who've died in this house, but it doesn't sound like it's that far-fetched. Just given the fact that it was built in 1856, and then the Bartells are living there in the late 1950s, it kind of, 22 people over that course of time is not totally unheard of, especially in the late 1800s when people kind of died frequently and at younger ages. There has also been the ghostly apparition of a woman in a white dress. There have been sightings of a young girl running around the hallways, laughing and playing, and then just disappears. Miss Bartell wrote a manuscript about her time at that house because they eventually moved out of it. And she was soon to be publishing that manuscript. Right after she was done and just before it was published, Miss Bartell, who I guess was having issues with depression and had reportedly attempted suicide a couple of times, or had at least suicidal thoughts, she died. Mysteriously, I guess, shortly after leaving the House of Death and writing that manuscript. A lot of people have said the house is cursed, and that when she left the house, she was doomed to die soon. And then the most recent tragic event to occur in the House of Death is an actual murder. It was November 2nd, 1987. At 6:40 a.m., 911 receives a phone call that a little girl living in this building, she was unconscious. It was a woman who said it was her daughter and that her daughter wasn't breathing. When paramedics arrived, they walked into this home and they found this 6-year-old girl lying nude on the kitchen floor. And her little brother, Mitchell, was tied to his playpen and sitting in a pile of his own urine. The mother had a Nussbaum. She also appeared to have been bruised and beaten. The 6-year-old girl, Lisa, was rushed to the hospital. She was still alive when they picked her up, but unfortunately she would pass away within a day or so of her being brought to the hospital. Police search the house and they find a ton of cocaine. They find 20 crack pipes, $25,000 in cash, and several other drugs. At the autopsy, they determined that Lisa had died from severe blunt force trauma. She had been beaten severely. And this was primarily to her skull. And right away, there were 2 people arrested. Her parents, Joel Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum. Joel Steinberg was a prominent attorney there in New York City. And once Lisa died, so initially they were both charged with abuse, but then when she died a couple of days later, they were both then charged with first-degree murder. However, police had looked at Hedda and said, obviously she's been a victim. She clearly was beaten. She had bruises all over her body. She seemed to be terrified, and it was later discovered that she was being beaten by her husband, Joel. And she agreed to testify against him at a trial, and if she did so and she cooperated, she wouldn't be charged with anything. Joel Steinberg would then go on trial for the murder of Lisa, and a jury would actually find him guilty of manslaughter in the 2nd degree. He received a very short prison sentence and was released in 2004. Jesus, this guy looks scary. Ugh. Yeah. It was said that Joel had beaten Lisa because he was going somewhere and Lisa wanted to go with him. And he was mad that she kept insisting on going. I mean, she's a 6-year-old kid who wanted to go somewhere with her dad. And he didn't like that. And he was already just out of his mind on cocaine at that point. And he ended up beating her over the head with a hammer. That's what he used. A hammer over his 6-year-old girl's skull. And it's just another kind of example of how the house may be cursed and how it's tragic. It's just one of those places. The building still stands today. There have been no recent reported deaths or anything evil happening inside the home, other than people still seeing the apparitions of ghosts and phantom smells and people being like brushed by someone being touched by someone, but there has been no other like evil acts that have taken place in the building that I'm aware of. Perhaps it's all just coincidence, or perhaps the building is just doomed for nonstop evil and death, murder and chaos. But if you ever choose to enter the building, hopefully you will leave the house and not become another member of the House of Death. And that is it for this story. True crime maroony or noony ding dongs. Whoops, said that wrong. Anyway, hi, my name is Mike. If you're new to my channel, I typically tell true crime stories here, but this week I've been telling spookier kind of stories, sort of, just to do something different for a little bit, But normally it's true crime, so please feel free to subscribe and give the video a like so more people can see it. I also tell short form true crime stories and the occasional spooky story over on TikTok on a couple different pages, and the links to my TikToks are also in the link tree in the description of this video below. Then lastly, if there is a true crime case or maybe a spooky story / haunted place you would like me to cover eventually, just send me a really quick email. My email is listed in the description as well, and just send me the name of the case or the house or the haunted place, where it is, when it all kind of happened, whatever the case may be, and I'll add that name to my list. The list is currently 6,300 plus names long. I pick these at random typically, so I can't promise you when I'll cover that particular story, but I will at some point. So yeah. Anyway, that's it for the video, so ta-ta for now, and we'll see you for the next video. I don't know. I don't know either. Just ignore me. This guy.